All right, we want to thank everybody for being here today to our service dog handler chat. We have a couple of just quick housekeeping issues that we want to go over. So the biggest one is stay muted when somebody else is speaking, because that helps the recording so that we don't have flashes that might trigger our seizure and other sight sensitive people. So if you stay muted, if you want to participate in the chat, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or have something you want to say about what we're currently talking about at the moment. If you want to talk about something that's related to our main topic of intelligent disobedience, then you can post that in the chat and we will see if we can get to it, if it's not involved with what we are talking about right at the moment. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our guest speaker. So Tony Harvey is coming with us today, or joining us today. He is currently a regional academy manager for guide dogs in the UK. And so he's been working in that field since 2008, has lots of great background and information, and him and I have had some private conversations about our topic of intelligent disobedience. So we kind of just wanted to carry that on today. So without further ado, Tony, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Penny. Yep, we have been chatting about this, haven't we? And I think the term intelligent disobedience is one that I first heard about actually when I joined guide dogs. So I guess I didn't really know what it meant at first, but after being in guide dogs for a while, I kind of got the idea of what they were talking about when they were talking about intelligent disobedience. So if I give a brief description of kind of what it means in practice and what we're talking about, and then we can go into a bit more depth about actually what it means and what we're talking about as opposed to kind of this label that we've given to this behavior that our dogs do for us. So it's basically a term used to describe what an animal does. In our case, it's mostly dogs that we're working with, when it does a different behavior to what would be expected from the cue that we give them. But the outcome is normally something positive or something that the trainer would want the dog or the animal to do. So in my world, in the guide dog world, this could be when the owner gives a forward cue to the dog. And normally that just means for the dog to go straight ahead, keep going forward. But in some circumstances, it might not be safe to move forward because there could be something blocking the way, or there could be a hole there. So we want the dog to do a different behavior to what we would normally expect it to do with the cue forward. And we've labeled that intelligent disobedience. I guess the reason that it's never quite sat quite right with me is just because of the disobedience part of it, because it almost implies that the dog's doing something naughty or something that it shouldn't be doing, or that it's doing this higher cognitive kind of behavior that it's just doing as if by magic because it's worked it all out in a really intelligent way. And I think it takes some emphasis away from what the trainer's actually doing. But the other side effect to it was I thought it could actually put extra pressure on the next dog that we might work with as well, because we thought, well, the last dog did it, this dog should surely be able to work it out for itself as well. So I think by defining it in a better way and probably more what's actually going on is good for us, hopefully, as people that are training our animals, but also good for the dogs that we're working with as well. So a couple of other examples, I guess, of how it works in guide dogs, because you guys might have different examples that you want to pitch in as well on what might be when the dog does something different to what you've asked for it, but you want it to do as well. So with guide dogs, quite often it's linked to when we give that forward cue. That could be when there's an obstacle in the way, there could be a hole there, or there could be a car coming. So in that circumstance, we either want the dog to stop and not move, or we want it to take a different line, or we want it to go to the side curb. And maybe go into the road and out to the other side to get around an obstacle or roadwork that's on the pavement. Other ways that we sometimes do it is when we might be asking the dog to go right or to go left, and there might be a building still in the way. So we might have a building on our right, we're asking the dog to go right, and there's no way it can go right until the gap opens up. So we're asking the dog not to do it until the gap's there. Other things, it might be that we're asking it to find a specific location, such as a particular shop, or it could be a particular object in the environment that we want it to find, and we could be nowhere near it and we're queuing it in way too early or at the wrong time to find it. And the other example I thought of as well, sometimes we could be aligned to cross the road, and we always want to cross the road completely straight because that's the shortest way to get across. So it means we're in the road for the least amount of time possible, but we could be completely facing the wrong way. So we could be facing out into the main road. So when we give that forward cue, we might be pointing the dog to go out into the traffic, and we want the dog to kind of ignore us, pull us straight and keep us going across the road like that. So it's all those kinds of little things where we're thinking, right, we want the dog to do something that is slightly different to what the cue would mean under normal circumstances as well. And a search and rescue one I thought of as well, which I don't work with, but I've got colleagues and friends that do, might be when we're asking them to search an area, and then we want to recall them, or we want them to ask them to search in a different area, but the dog might be onto a scent or be onto something known then. So in that circumstance, we might want the dog not to do that recall. We might not want it not to go to that new area as well. So it's about teaching those different behaviours when there's different contingencies going on.
A common one that we discuss quite often is a simple one like the dog. So Azul is a medical alert dog. So if I place him in a downstay somewhere, but he needs to release himself from that downstay to come to a medical alert, which is more important. You know, he shouldn't release himself from the downstay to go check out a squirrel, but he should release it to do the medical alert. So teaching him kind of that difference. Another common one is, oh man, and I just lost it. But yeah, so there's a lot of them actually that apply like that, where we give a cue. Oh yeah, so for Azul, there's one that is for his comfort level. That is also considered intelligent disobedience, or the way that we frame it, or the way I think of it anyways, is that typically he's always in a heel on the right because I like him on that side. But I've spent a lot of time that if I see a distraction coming up or something that I don't want him to interact with and it's going to pass us on the right, he's taught by cue to switch to the left-hand side automatically. And he's always on a hands-free leash and he has just enough room to do that. But also for his comfort level, he's taught that if something's coming up that he finds mildly scary, which I mean, he's very rock solid and finds very little scary. But if there's something that he doesn't want to interact with, he will also automatically do that switch. So where I might cue a heel, and to him that means heel on my right side, he knows he has the flexibility to break that heel to switch to the left side whenever he feels the need to do so. And then sometimes he will also do that, well, because like both of my knees could give out at any one time, not usually both of them at the same time. But so if he's feeling an issue with my left leg, he might automatically switch to that left side and walk on that side for a while, where he can be more counterbalance on that side as well. So those are kinds of things that he's intelligently figured out in his own way to be able to help us. And I see Cindy has her hand raised too. So go ahead, Cindy. You probably have another example.
I was just thinking, because I do competitive obedience and rally with Nick, and when I want him to, his service dog behaviors come before his rally behaviors. So in the competition ring, I would much rather have him miss a sign or a cue, or a performance, one of his issues, than have him miss a cue for a medical issue. He's mostly mobility, and for a mobility issue, if I need him to come over and put some pressure on my leg or something while I'm walking. Or in the last case of the rally, I got really dizzy doing in the course, and I needed him basically to say, you're going to screw up so much you can't compete. And he did it for me. But I want him to tell me those things before, if there's an issue in the ring, before he tells me, okay, I'm going to do a perfect behavior in the ring.
Yeah, great examples. I think that's a really good way of showing when we want the dog to do something different to what we've just cued it for, isn't it? So I was thinking, what's going on with the animal in our case? Is the dog being disobedient? And I don't think it is. I think we want to reframe it as the dog's responding to a contingency it's faced with. And it's actually something we've taught it, or we've taught the dog the set of rules. So a way that I thought might help to frame for us what's going on in this situation is, if we're driving down a road and all the lights are green as we're driving down the road, we just keep driving. We understand that's the rule. Lights are green, we keep driving. And then if suddenly the light goes red, that's a different contingency for us all of a sudden. So we know that means that we have to stop. And that's a set of rules that we've learned. We keep driving, lights green, keep driving, something changes, and now I have to do a different behavior, which is stopping when the light's red. And that's something that we didn't know from the offset when we started driving, but that's something that we've learned and we've been taught to do. So if an alien came down to Earth and decided they're going to start driving on our roads, apart from the fact we'd have to teach them how to drive everything, they would have no idea about what green or red or any of those things meant until we actually taught it. And if we're playing a board game like Monopoly as well, that comes with its own set of rules. So you always get to go and you always get your $200 or whatever it is, except if you're going to jail, and then you never stop there and you never collect your money and all those sorts of things. But those are all sets of rules, and that's all we're doing with our training as well. So with my guide dog, if I want it to go forward, what I actually mean is I want you to go forward when I cue it, when there's nothing in front of you. So then during the training, I would start to introduce more rules to what I'm trying to ask. So basically more contingencies, which means, if X happens, then do Y. But then, if X happens and then you get this W as well, it just means you might do Z instead. So we have to think about how we start to frame it for ourselves so that we can actually train what we want to train, but also how it's going to make sense for the dog and how we set up the dog for success in these sorts of ways as well, so that we're not setting the dog up to fail when we're not creating frustration behaviors and all of those sorts of things. So those are the things that we have to start to introduce to our training as well. So we get a really good behavior first with the cue that we want. So you were saying there you might be doing your competitive work, so you want that really good along with your alerting work. You want both of those behaviors really good, but then you want to teach the hierarchy of which one's most important, don't you? And under which circumstances do you do this behavior, and which one do you say, right, I'm not doing that one, I'm going to do this instead. So that's kind of the art that we have to start doing with our dogs. It's how do I introduce it in such a way that the dog has success, and then I can train it as well, and none of us get frustrated with it. So then with a guide dog, what I have to start to teach then is that when I cue forward and the way is blocked, you have to do a different behavior. So this could mean going to the side curb. So quite often what we do in guide dogs is if the pavement ahead is completely blocked by something, so there's no way to stay on the pavement and get past it, we teach the dog to go to the side curb and then go out into the road and then back onto the curb as soon as possible, which I don't know whether you would do in the US or not, whether you would go out into the road in that, but that's something that we do teach in the UK. If the way is completely blocked, you go to the side curb and then you go around it. So it's the same cue, but the context changed and the contingencies changed. So what we kind of really have is, I guess, a chain of behavior. So the cue starts off whatever behaviors it's doing. And sometimes I think to work out exactly what we want to train, it's easier to work backwards from the end goal that we're trying to get to, and then we can just work backwards and we can work out, well, this is the behavior that I want to happen when this is the contingency that the dog's faced with. So we can teach the whole thing doing it that way. And when we actually teach the off-curb obstacles to our dogs as well, we actually use back chain as well. So we start at the end and then we work all the way back. And then once we start to teach that, then we have to generalize it as well. So it's not just on that bit of pavement the dog goes to the side curb. So we have to make sure the dog understands that it's actually because the pavement's blocked that you're going to the side curb. So it's all of those kinds of things that we have to start building into the training when we're doing it. And one of the ways that I've found really helps me to think about what we're training is to think about a decision tree as well. And this is something I heard somebody that was teaching tag teach was using for basketball. And what it meant was when they got the basketball, they would normally they would just shoot, and they would shoot when they got the basketball unless there was a defender in front of them, and then that meant they would do a different behavior. So they had these different contingencies. So one, they get the ball, nobody in front, they shoot. Two, they get the ball, there's somebody in front, so then they pass. So that starts to build up two different behaviors they can do based on what's in front of them, but the start of that sequence is exactly the same. They get the ball and then they have to make a decision based on the context that they're in and the contingency that they're faced with as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I have a really good example of that, since so many people are familiar with the analogy of you ask the dog to stay, but they're allowed to break the stay for a medical alert kind of thing. So I had x-rays one day, and I usually will put something down on the floor for my dog as kind of a, this is your thing to stay by. So it might be my treat bag. It might be, my code, it might be anything. And so the one day, the only thing I happened to have was my cell phone. So I put my cell phone down for the dog to do, which I didn't want it by me when I was getting x-rays anyways. But so I put it down as his, stay by the phone. Well, he's also trained to retrieve my phone on cue, or, if it's ringing and it's not near me, he's trained to retrieve it. So thankfully we were done with the x-rays and just wrapping up when my cell phone rang. So he picked up the phone and brought it to me, breaking the stay, which is not something I want him to do, but I had never trained him to not do it in that situation. It wasn't a contingency I had ever planned for. So, I couldn't punish Azul anyways, because I don't punish. But all I could do was then thank him for handing me the phone, because that was a job he knew he was supposed to do. And then after the fact, then I could build in that contingency of, if you're not in a stay, if we're home and relaxed, you can bring me the phone. But if I ask you to stay, the phone's not important. Or the other easy way around that is just make sure my phone isn't the object I placed down for him to be his anchor object. So you can kind of think about what's going to happen more frequently. Is it better just to avoid the situation because you did something like used your phone for an anchor, so gave him missed signals? Or, if it's something that's going to happen so frequently that you need to say, all right, in this situation, no, but in this situation, yes. So that's kind of a good way of just picturing the whole idea of you have to build that contingency. It's something I never thought of. It's something I never built, and building it backwards, it's much easier to train for the situation going backwards than if I had thought of it ahead of time and tried to do it going forwards. I probably would have messed it up. So good example there, I think.
I know, going backwards really does help us in so many ways, doesn't it? Which sounds like it shouldn't do, but it really does. So with the off-curb obstacles, it's quite an easy one to start with the dogs as well, because it's so obvious they can't really make mistakes because we have something that's blocking the pavement. So that kind of limits the choices to start with. So as much as we want to provide our dogs with as much choice and as much control as we can also help them by providing choice sometimes, but also limiting how many choices there are, so we can support them to get those right as well. So we might offer 2 choices and make one a lot easier to do than the other, and that just might simply mean that if we got the handle, sometimes we might just be holding it there, and then when we feel them move in the right direction, we might just release then, so then we just go with them then, as a kind of a positive way of doing things, really. So the choices are there, but we just help them get the right one. With something like giving a forward cue when we've got something that could potentially be dangerous in front of somebody with a visual impairment, and this could be a gap or a train platform. Oh, there's a question there from Ashlyn, is it?
Yeah, I was just going to ask her if she wanted to type it in the chat because I'm not seeing it. Ashlyn, you can do either. You can unmute if you want to talk it. Say it, I should say.
Oh, no, that was yours. I thought she had already.
I didn't see it in the chat, but I could be wrong.
It's not there.
Yeah.
Did you want to type it, Ashlyn? Or you want to?
I'm assuming she is typing it. So Ashlyn sometimes is hard to understand due to her disability. So she typically would type it for one of us to read. While those of us that are here all the time can easily understand her, it's hard for other people. So she is typing. So we can continue and come back to that in a moment if we want to.
Great. Yeah, just stop me when you're ready. That's fine. So if we're teaching the dogs, like we're giving the cue forward and there's something dangerous in front of somebody with a visual impairment, and this could be a hole or it could be a train platform, that's something where you don't want the dog to go forward if there's no train there. We want to be able to introduce this other behavior, which could just be not moving when we give the forward cue, which we've taught very positively that every time we give a forward, you go forward. So every time when we introduce it, we start with platforms as well, so they go forward, they get the clicker, and they get the reinforcement at the platform or the up curb or whatever we're using. So it's highly reinforced. So we have to be aware of that when we start to introduce. We want you to do something different now. We've taught you that. We want you to do something different. And the way we would do that, probably, that when we start it, and this could be, I'll think about Cindy's example as well in a second, is that when we're there, we know how powerful this forward cue is because we've been charging it up for weeks already. So when we want them to do something different, what we might do is just do a very low level cue to start with. So that could be, I'm going to stand up here because it's a bit easier. So the normal cue would be a big arm wave and forward. And what we might start to do is just a tiny forward and just say something really quiet, or just, you know, something like forward, and then click and reward for not moving. So we'd start to build it in like that. So we want the dog to have success. So we would have it at such a low level, the dog's not going to go forward when we first introduce that forward, when there's a different contingency in play. So just a very low level, but click and reinforce the dog for not moving. This could be the same with traffic as well. So when we're on the down curb, so we're waiting to cross the road, and a car's coming, we teach the dogs that when we give a forward cue in the presence of a car at a certain distance coming, we don't want the dog to move. So what we can do then is just reinforce the dog for not moving. And like I said, we just give a very low level cue when we're doing that, and we can build it up again. And I don't know whether you guys have heard of there was a study done a number of years ago now with pigeons, where they tried to teach errorless learning and try to evidence how errorless learning is a better way of working. And so they would have these different lights, and they had a red and green light. I can't remember which way it was, but I think the red light meant to peck it, and the green light meant they got nothing. So if they peck the red light, they get reinforcement, they get a piece of food. And the way that they would sometimes do it, trial and error, would be you have the red light, click reinforce, click reinforce, click reinforce, and then you have the green light, and then they might peck it, but there's no reinforcement. They might peck it, there's no reinforcement. So kind of trial and error. And you'll get a lot of frustration behaviors from this as well. So the way they started to do it was they would have the red light, peck, reinforce, peck, reinforce, peck, reinforce, and then they would introduce the green light at a very low level. So it would hardly be visible at all. And then they wouldn't peck it, and then they'd have the red light, so they'd peck that. And they would gradually increase the ratio of the brightness of the light as well, so that the pigeons were not making any mistakes as they slowly raised how bright that light was. And that was a way that they would introduce it there. So it would be the same. So if Cindy was doing her the behavior work that you're doing, I can't remember what it was you were saying you're doing, but that performance work as opposed to your alerting. Go on, Cindy.
It's rally.
Rally, yeah. So if you're doing your rally work and you've got your alerting work, the alerting work's the most important thing there, isn't it? Because that's the one that you want them to do. So you might you might have the alert there, you want them to alert, and then you might just at a very low level introduce one of your cues to start the rally, and you wouldn't want them to do that and override that. So it'd be at a very low level so that dog would not make a mistake, and then you would reinforce for the alerting, and you could start to build that up more and more until you got to the level where your cue for the rally was the same level it would be if you were cueing the rally, but in the presence of the cue that you want it to do for your alerting as well. And that's how we would slowly build it up to that, so that they would hopefully never make any mistakes.
So Ashlyn had a example that is a little bit different. She lives with her parents and maybe other family members, but I know that. Anyways, so her service dog is trained to not go past a certain line in the kitchen unless Ashlyn is past that line, and then she goes with her, or Ashlyn sends her to do something. So if any other person is past that line, the dog isn't going in there and getting in the way. Mm-hmm. Stays out of that area unless she needs to help Ashlyn or, in some way. So that's kind of another good example of the dog needs to know when it's appropriate to do something versus not appropriate to do something.
Yeah, and it's just it's another example, isn't it, of that we're teaching the dogs a kind of set of rules, and not rules as in the way you have to obey this or anything like that. It's just a set of well, it's a set of contingencies, isn't it? We want you to do this, you'll get reinforcement for doing this, and this is how you get your reinforcement. We don't want you to do it at other times, so we kind of would slowly teach you what it means, and we don't want to do that by trial and error, because we know that can cause frustration in our dogs. And it's not the most efficient way of training anyway. So we want to do it in such a way that we can build on that success all the way through. And because in guide dogs, we're obviously working with people with visual impairment as well, most of the time, probably similar to Ashlyn's example there, we're relying on the environment as our cues, so that when the person's not able to help with the cues, the environment has to be doing the job for us. And it sounds like Ashley's got a line in the kitchen or something, which will help as a bit of a cue there. And so that's exactly the same for us. We rely on the environment. So we really need to know what we want to be the cues when we're asking our dogs to do these behaviors, because in all likelihood, there won't be that support further down the line. So when we are building in the difficulty as well, what we're always doing is we're teaching the dog all the rules. This is how you do it. Here's all the support so we can make sure they do it right. You get success, success, success. And then we just want to ease back on the support that we're giving the dog, because ultimately in the end they're going to be with a person with a visual impairment that is most of the time not able to provide that support, and we want the dog to be confident and happy and be able to do that without the support there as well. So once we've taught everything, that is when we would start to really lower how much support we're giving the dog, just so that we can make sure that we're building it up and it's having all the success and building up on its history of reinforcement, so that when it is with a guide dog owner and the support isn't there, it still knows exactly what it's doing based on what the environment's telling it and what cues are there.
So I have a question, may or may not be related. So I'm gonna throw it out there anyways, because it's something that I know a lot of us struggle with, and you might have kind of a unique perspective on it. So you train the dog to know when it's safe, not safe to approach. Do you struggle with training handlers to actually listen to the dog when they don't know something is there? And the reason I ask that is that that's a big issue with, say, a lot of people that train their dogs for medical alerts. If the medical alert is something like Cindy's, where hers is a diabetic, so she's actually got scientific equipment where she can check to see if it's a true alert or not. But if you're looking at something like mine where it's migraines, there's no test I can do at home to say if it's a true alert or not, other than waiting to see what happens as far as, do I end up with the symptoms of a migraine or not, you know? So a lot of us really struggle with trusting the dog. And so is that something that you kind of find that once you've actually taught the dog the set of contingencies, is it hard to teach that set of contingencies and the trust in that contingency to the handler?
Yes, of course it's yeah, we work with people as well, and sometimes, so, as you'll all know as well, sometimes it's a lot easier to teach the dogs than it is to teach the people sometimes, isn't it? One example I do have, I trained this lady, and she was going down one of her usual routes. She had no residual vision at all, and her dog stopped, and she thought there was nothing ahead, so she forced the dog on. She took the lead, forced the dog on, and then she clattered into all the roadworks that were on the pavement there blocking the way that the dog had stopped for. And from that point on, for quite a long time, the dog didn't want to go that route at all. So we had to put a lot of work in to kind of undo all that positive punishment, basically, from that one time when this person didn't listen to her dog. But what we do is we do build in a kind of check, and we do call it a check a lot of the time. So if the dog's gotten to the side curb, it's indicated that the pavement ahead's blocked, but the person might think, I don't know whether you're genuine there could be a squirrel on the other side of the road or something like that. We will get them to turn back to where the obstacle was, and if the dog goes back to the side curb, then it's more likely that you know, that contingency is right and the dog's done the right thing. So in your case, if you've you know, it's alerted for a migraine and you're not sure whether it's right, I don't know whether there's another way you could set up, like, yeah, not 100% sure, ask the question again kind of thing, and would it alert again? And it'll be trying to build in that sort of say, yep, you're right, I just want to double check that, can you alert again, just so that I know that it's definitely what you're saying.
That's actually a really good point. And so I've taught Azul to do an escalated alert. So his first migraine alert, his first step in the alert is a nose nudge. And if he then sees me, you know, grab my meds and everything and do what I need to do, then he's done and he goes away. But a lot of times maybe I'm busy, I'm distracted, I'm doing something else, and I do nose nudge and I tend to procrastinate. So he knows I didn't listen to him, basically. So then he's trained to go get my meds. And so he has another step after that. But so if I'm not quite sure if he did his nose bump or not, or wondering if maybe he just tapped me accidentally because he was excited or looking somewhere else or whatever, then I will ask him, do I need meds? And when I ask him, do I need meds? That's kind of his counter of, you need to alert again, either by giving me another nose bump or getting my meds for me. And so that's kind of my way of judging that. And I never really thought about that would apply to other disabilities too. It's just kind of what came natural to us. So that's a really good way to think about it as I look into helping other people with training different things. That was a very good way to phrase it.
I see Elliot's got the hand up, but just going to your point there as well, Penny, I guess one of the things you have to be aware of is you're using reinforcement to get the behaviors you want. So you don't want the dog doing a load of fake nudges to alert you and starting off that sequence so they get reinforced at the end of it, regardless of whether you've got a migraine coming or not. So that's something you have to think about with the training.
Every dog goes through that stage, and I swear they do. So, so I will admit, to everybody who knows me knows I freely feed my dog human food. At home, he gets human food all the time. Everybody who knows me knows I do that. So he also knows he doesn't touch it when we're out in public. So he's good there. But so when he was very, very young and still working on finalizing his migraine alerts, it wasn't uncommon for him to do his nose boop because he wanted whatever I was eating. So like you said, we had to kind of work around that and show that, no, this isn't the right time for the nose nudge unless I need meds, which is kind of where that came in. I would say, do I need meds? And if he didn't get my meds, then he was just begging for food. So then if I wanted to give him the food, I would ask him to do a different behavior before I gave him the food. So he wasn't being reinforced for that nose nudge in that situation. And that really, it's kind of mixing the two things of, is your dog alerting just to get the reinforcement? And do you have that contingency built in or that way of checking? Like, is there something that you can ask the dog to do again to make sure it is an actual true alert? So that was those two kind of tied in real nicely together.
Elliot, have you got a question?
I was just going to kind of piggyback off of Penny on the escalation, because that's why my dog is smaller. He's a miniature Xolo, so he's only about 17 inches tall. So for him, and because he does psychiatric alerts, I have him jump and paw because he doesn't do that in any other context. And I have him escalate from just jumping on me to actively pawing at my arm to try to pull me down so that I can sit down for deep pressure or be in his reach for tactile stimulation, etc. And so he's trained to escalate like that to get me to go down to his level if he needs to, if I'm just not listening.
Yeah, great example, I think, because I was just thinking, well, Penny was talking there as well, because some behaviors you could have to alert could be something like a chin rest on your lap, but a chin rest is actually quite reinforcing by itself to lots of dogs anyway. We teach a chin rest to our guide dogs as well because it's part of cooperative care, and they put their chin down and we can check their ears and their eyes and things. But you will get a lot of chin rests in between, so that kind of escalation for you there. And you mentioned as well behaviors your dog doesn't normally do, and that's a lot of clearer way of thinking, right, my dog doesn't normally do this behavior, so if I pair this with the scent or the aura or whatever it is you're working with, you're less likely to get that behavior occurring at other times when you don't want it as well. And it's probably a bit easier to make sure it's truly paired with what you want it to be as well.
Exactly. That's why I paired his the behaviors he already wanted to do. For the most part, I paired them for something like less of an alert or a task, but more of, I have him bump into things with his butt is what I'm training to shut a door, because he already slams his butt into me to get pets on his rear end. So like that's super reinforcing, and shoving your butt against the door is a little less fun for him. So if I already have a fun behavior, he's more likely to do it. The only like high rate of reinforcement behavior I used already for tasking actually was his he had a behavior where he hooks his paw around my arm and pulls my hand directly to his chest. And I use that because it forces me to pet him and forces me to do the tactile stimulation. But I use that as part of the pre-mac back chaining. That's the end result of his training. So that chains him to want to do that towards the end, which helped with the jumping and everything else, because that was then self-reinforcing end behavior. But it wasn't, I didn't want to use it as an alert because it made more sense to be that self-reinforcing end.
Yeah, love a bit of pre-mac in there. The other thing as well is using behaviors which they do, you know, quite naturally, is really good for start buttons as well. So if you want a start button behavior, that's kind of where you would start with something like that, something that they're going to offer quite readily, and then it's something that you can use to kickstart a behavior, which is why we use things like a chin rest and the bucket game as well for the cooperative care we do. It's nice and easy to kind of for the dogs to get right, and then they're a good way for them to communicate with us as well. Any other sort of questions or areas you want to talk about, or anything else I can tell you about guide dogs as well?
We could move on to the whole idea of phasing out the verbal cues. So, I mean, you talked about how if the environment changes, that causes the contingency. So you start talking about it a little bit, but then sometimes that environment or that, you know, medical scent or whatever it is, how do you guys go about it when you're starting to phase out? You talked about how you build up the cue to where you start real small with the like go forward cue and slowly get it up to where you would normally give the go forward cue. When it comes to phasing out that cue, is there a particular process you use for phasing out the cues, the verbal cues?
Yeah, it's just that one of them, I guess the main is not a vocal cue, but one of the main cues we have for avoiding obstacles is we use a collar cue. So we teach the dogs to respond to a very light pressure in the collar, so that, you know, if we're walking along, we can do a gentle, and it is really gentle, it's like power steering, really gentle sort of pressure on the right, and then the dog moves to the right, and then we can do it on the left and it moves to the left. But this can be quite addictive for trainers because it works so well, and it's a really nice way to train the dogs in a really, you're stood back, so you're not influencing the dog too much, you're doing this light pressure and it's teaching the dogs to move left or right to avoid obstacles. But of course what you got then is you kind of got your safety net, and it's very easy just to keep steering your dog. And like you're asking there, Penny, at some point our dogs need to be able to do it without that cue there, without that support from the handler. And so that's kind of a balancing act of how we do that. So obviously once we've taught it a lot, and when we're teaching as well, we normally make sure we've got a reinforcement point just behind, because we wouldn't give reinforcement just halfway along a pavement just for moving to the right or to the left. And the reason we normally don't do that is just because you can end up with behaviors whereby the dog will stop in the middle of the pavement for reinforcement, and then if the guide or owner is not sure why it's done it, they could inadvertently reinforce a stop behavior when there's actually nothing there. So we are quite cautious about reinforcing in the middle of the pavement, so we would normally stick to a very obvious objective. So yeah, so what we would do is once we've taught the collar cues quite well, we would start to have to read our dog's body language actually, just to see what do we think, are they going to do it or not. So we see an obstacle ahead, the dog needs to move right, got the lead in our left hand, we keep it there because we don't want to cue the dog at all with our right hand, and we'd just be observing the dog to start with. So if we see the head moving to the right, then we think it's going to get it, and then we can get in there with verbal praise. So we're not giving the collar cue, but we would verbally praise the dog for starting to make the right move, and would help out like that. And then during the course of a walk, the dog, we might think the dog might not do it, so we might go back to a collar cue as well. So we're constantly watching the dog, observing it, and dipping in and out with the support levels that we're doing. So that's one way we'd start to do it. The other way we would start to do it is something like that is, because quite often it's related to narrow gaps. So you'll have a gap there, which is wide enough for the dog to get through, but it's not wide enough for a dog and a person to get through. And you can collar cue the dog around that to make the right decision, which is how we would start it. But because we want the dog to start making that decision as well, what we would do with that scenario is we would have a platform to start with, and then we would have a platform the other side of the gap, and then we would want the dog to be able to find the platform without going through the gap, but without a collar cue as well. So we would start off with a gap here, there's a platform here, gap just in front, and then ultimately the platform will be directly opposite, so the dog will be able to see it. But our start position for that would be the platform over in the direction we want the dog to go to start with. So we could give her forward and the dog would make its way to the platform, and then we would slowly move the platform back into that really hard position. So that's kind of like your boss level. Level one's over here where it's really easy to get. And the hardest level is over here where it can see it straight through the gap. So that would be another way that we'd start to get the dog to do it by itself a lot more, really, because we wouldn't be using a collar cue there, we'd be using other visual aids. And then once they get in it right, it obviously gets in the reinforcement at that point, and we just make it more and more difficult. Then what we have to build in, which is, I guess, another level on from just fading out the cues, is we have to build in the wrong cues and the wrong handling from our handlers as well, because they don't always know what's in the environment. So quite often, if there's a gap there, the person might think, oh, that, like you were saying earlier as well, how do you get the handlers to listen to their dog? A very similar situation. They'd be like saying, no, go on left, go on left. And the dog will know the gap's too small, it should be going there. So we'd actually start to build that into our training as well. So we'd have the platform there in the hardest position. We've already built up a strong history of reinforcement. And then we would start saying to the dog, go on left, go on left. And then the dog, again, with this new set of contingencies, would then go around and then go to that reinforcement point as well. So yeah, rather than getting rid of all the cues, I guess we have them, we always have them. We just build up the environmental cues to really have a strong meaning for what the dog does in that situation. And then we make it more and more difficult as we go through, but always trying to make sure we set the dogs up for success and reading their body language as we're going along to make sure that we don't, you know, push it too far as well. We need the dogs to be really well prepared, but we don't want to set them up for failure as well during the training.
Kind of phasing out those cues has always been really important to me, because I mean, with my disability, the wrong words come out all the time. And of course that comes into cues as well. And there'd be like multiple times I could totally say the wrong cue. Like I could be telling my dog, meaning to tell my dog, let's go, and tell them to get in the car or something, you know, just totally opposite. And so phasing out those verbal cues so that he's more aware of my body and environment and knows what's expected, so that I don't have to say any words at all. If I'm not giving any verbal cues at all, I mean, obviously you still give subtle body language cues, even if you're not trying to. So I need him to be able to pick up on those. So I actually start that at a pretty young age. And I've actually had my other dogs help with that if I've given the wrong cue, because I usually have an older dog in the home. And the older dog will read the body language and show the puppy the behavior that he wants. So, you know, for example, I'm telling the puppy to go around something verbally, but what I want is my puppy to sit on the blanket or mat. You know, my older dog will break from his station where he's staying and run over to the puppy's mat and sit, so the puppy knows what to do, kind of thing. So I've seen that happen time and time again because of my word mix-ups that happen all the time. And that's kind of why phasing out those cues are really important to me.
I guess in guide dogs, generally, because they're going to a person with a vision impairment, all the cues that we're using, we kind of fade out. So the cues are all environmental by the end of it. But what we do, like you were saying there, because you use the wrong words and that, we do exactly that. So, you know, for a road crossing, we're at the road and it's just a forward cue like that. And by the time we get to the end of training, we're just going forward and we're waving our arms and we're doing something which doesn't look at all like the nice, clean forward cue that we were doing. So, you know, when people are training animals in their zoo environment as well, they have very clean, precise cues. We're kind of working for the opposite. We want really messy cues so that the dog can respond to it in a variety of different ways with a variety of different people as well. We want the dogs to really be responding to everything that's going on around them. And if the cue that they get is slightly different from their previous handler, that's absolutely fine. We want that generalization to have taken place as well.
I think that kind of wraps up as much as like we had discussed that we wanted to get through. So do we want to kind of turn it over? Does anybody else here have any questions? Raise your hand first so we can get to the first come, first serve. And Tiara, that would be you. So go ahead.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you just fine.
Okay. I joined a little bit late. So my bad about that. But I wanted to ask, Tony, do you offer any online classes for like service dog handlers if we're interested in kind of learning a bit more? And also I wanted to know your opinion about, there's one class I did see online, but I'm not sure if I want to make sure it's something real and something legit. Because I feel like there's so many that's fake out there.
Do you mean us as guide dogs in the UK?
Oh, you're in the UK. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we do have some stuff online actually. Now we've got something called Good Dog, I can always give the links to Penny as well afterwards, and she can maybe share if people want them. But yeah, you're right. There are a lot of organisations out there, or not organisations, that are offering stuff which aren't completely kosher.
Right, right.
So us as a group, because chat is kind of ran by the Crazy2Calm Canine Coaches, we do have online classes. If you go to crazy2calm.net, so it's the number 2, crazy, number 2, calm, just like on our background there, my background and Cindy's, and then .net, you can see our classes. We have everything from the basic, stages of life, like puppy, crazy adolescence, to specific service dog classes, foundational classes, medical alert classes. We have a whole bunch of stuff there. So you have something specifically on intelligent disobedience, but that might be coming.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's all. And these look like they're all online, right?
At the Crazy2Calm, they are all online. Yes, we all have our personal websites for local in-person kind of classes, and then collaborate to bring it all together for online stuff. Since we work so much together with the same classes, we share instead of trying to do it all ourselves. So,
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions? I know Cindy does. She always has questions or something she wants to say.
I don't know. I'm trying to think, because I've had a lot of experience with guide dogs between my sisters both puppy walked guide dogs for a program, and then the trainer I'm working with for, I want a neutral third party certification. So I'm working with a program, and the program I'm working with, the trainer happens to be a former guide dog trainer for Guide Dogs for the Blind. So the stuff, I can't believe the stuff she makes me do with my dog as far as harassing him. Almost as bad. We haven't played Frisbee and PetSmart with Crystal yet, but I did with my other trainer. We were doing that for distraction for puppy sit stays. But do you find, it seems like you're training like thoroughbred or Grand Prix horses, high level, Olympic level horses for amateur riders in some ways? Do you, because the skill of the dogs, do you, with all the training, do you find that that's difficult to get the handlers to understand the training and how to maintain the training on the dogs?
I'd say that's different. Everyone's an individual, isn't it? I think so. That's probably different with different people. And I think, although yes, we do have, our dogs are thoroughbreds. Obviously, all of us that work with dogs know that not all dogs are perfect. Even in the guide dogs world, they all do dog things, don't they? Which
right.
Isn't conducive to being a great guide dog all of the time. I think some of the struggle we have is because historically in the past we would have trained differently to how we train now, and some of our guide dog owners would have had a number of guide dogs through the years, and this could be going back 40, 50 years. And the way we train our animals now and our knowledge now is so much greater than it used to be. But the methods that they may have used in the past, as far as they're concerned, have worked as well. And so we do have a lot of the time where we have to change, I guess, people's mindset on how they're working with the dog, which is really hard if they consider the way they've worked in the past has worked for them. It's quite scary, isn't it, to change the way that you've been working for a long time. And as an organization, this is how we told you to work as well, but do you mind just changing now? And it's a lot to take on. So we're very conscious about how we do that in a sensitive way and try and get people on board. Strangely enough, actually, one of the behaviors that we found really helped with this is the chin rest, because people just love it, and it's nothing to do with guiding, but just having a dog place its chin on the lap is something that I think helps create a nice bond with their dog as well. So that's one of the behaviors that's really helped. The other one that's had a really good effect, so I guess you've all seen guide dog harnesses and what they look like, and in the past we would have just the dog would have been roughly where we wanted it, and we would have just plonked it on the dog. Not a lot of choice and control in how we used to do it. And now what we do is we get them to target the hole, put their own head through and all of that, and the dog will be wagging its tail and it will run up to the harness when you get it. this has had a really positive effect on guide dog owners, because not all dogs love wearing the harness or have done in the past. And so they would feel like their dog didn't want to go on a walk with them if they didn't love the harness. So this small change of a dog, you know, appearing to look happy with its tail wagging and running towards the harness and putting its head in has changed how guide dog owners feel about, because they think, oh, my dog really wants to go out for the walk now. So those kind of small things are really helping change the way that people feel. Not saying it's always perfect, because you always get the people that are really hard to change. So we do have, you know, we've got our ethical policy in place for guide dogs, and we've got, you know, the standards we expect our guide dog owners to work to. And we have social media now as well, so that if people are handling the dogs in a way that we would rather they didn't, we quite often will get a complaint in from the general public now, alerting us to how a dog's being handled.
Yeah, I just was curious because a lot of, you know, dogs act up, horses act up, they're animals. And I know I've had a lot of issues with my current service dog maturing, and he's a standard poodle. And one of the things I think he's given me is more skills to deal with his personality. And, you know, I kind of feel like, you know, unless I just kind of wonder, unless the handlers had those kind of behaviors to deal with, you know, are they capable, or do they have the resources to deal with them? Or are you pretty good at matching the dogs with, you know, this person wants a more advanced dog versus, you know, this person really needs a dog that is going to do what we want it to do no matter what?
Yep, you hit the nail on the head there. Matching is the most important part of our job, really. If we get the match right with the dog and the person, training a dog with the person is so much easier. And if we get that match wrong, it's really not easy at all. Our dogs are probably about 2 by the time they go to a guide dog owner, so they've already had, you know, quite a history of the training. So we know the dogs pretty well by the time we match them. We know our handlers pretty well, and so like you're saying there, Cindy, some dogs will do stuff which one handler might be able to deal with, another handler might not be able to deal with that at all. And then some people might just accept the dog, you know, oh, that's fine, the dog runs after squirrels every time it sees it, it doesn't really bother me, it's a safe place that we're at. Other guide dog owners just might not be able to deal with that or cope with it, you know, from a mental point of view as well. So matching is the most important part. We do provide, I know some of the American schools are slightly different, but we provide aftercare as well through the life of the dog. So if they are having issues, we will go and see the dog. There will be occasions where we can bring the dog back in for some refresher training as well, and the client, so we can do more training with them. But we do generally work quite closely with our clients throughout the life of the guide dog as well. But yeah, it's all about the match. And Jen's, I think, had her hand up.
Yeah, so I was wondering, you know, you're talking about like the transition and the way that you guys used to do training over there and what people became used to versus, you know, I'm assuming that you used more balanced training methods and now you're more positive reinforcement.
Yeah,
what has been your biggest challenge with getting people to switch over from being so mentally connected to balanced training and then getting them more positive about positive reinforcement?
Yeah, so yeah, we've had quite a big shift in the UK. So in guide dogs, we won't use positive punishment with the dogs, and so we don't do the leash pops, I think they're called over there as well, or we used to do handle corrections as well. So we don't actually do physical punishment with the dogs, and we, you know, really strongly push away from even using vocal reprimands as well, really, unless, you know, the dog's going to put itself in danger or something like that. The way, for me personally, the way that we have to change people is by having some success. So we have to teach them something that they can have some success with and see the benefits from it as well. Because I personally don't think it's enough just to tell people this is better because I say it is, or because the dog's welfare better, because sometimes that doesn't hit home. People have different paradigms to what we all have, don't they? So they have a different reason why they think what they're doing is right or wrong. So I would very much focus on the person, what the person needs and wants most out of the dog they're working with, and then how I can build in positive reinforcement to show them that is the best way of getting that out of the dog they're working with. I guess one great example I had of when I was working with the guys, our dogs can quite often have dog distraction. They want to go and say hello to other dogs, and we work really hard on, you know, getting them to focus on the next objective, which could be a curb or something else, and they get reinforcement there. But these behaviours come back, and like Cindy was saying, they develop behaviours when they're with owners that maybe they wouldn't have with a trainer, and this can happen with us as well. But if we teach people right, we can leave them with the skills to problem solve themselves, and that can be very empowering for the person to work through something themselves without having to call on us for help. It's quite depressing for us because we're not needed anymore, so we have to get over that from our point of view. But yeah, so I taught this guy all the way that you would deal with it, and then I went to do the aftercare one day, and we regularly go out and see them, and I asked how things were going, and he was like, yep, great, saw a walk and everything, nothing wrong with the walk. And he said, oh, the dog distraction did come up for a while there, and the dog kept on going over to other dogs. So I thought, okay, you didn't call. He goes, nope, I just started reinforcing again at the curbs with a higher saliency of food, and got there. So he got a massive win, not only from making his dog's behavior better with what he wanted, but he did it himself as well, which is very empowering and very reinforcing for somebody. So I would say start on things where you know that you can have wins with first, and get some buy-in before you start to do everything. I think we can overwhelm people sometimes, can't we, with everything we want to do, because we're so passionate about it and we want it to be as positive reinforcement as possible, but we have to pick on what battles we can win first, I think.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Okay, so that's me, and I got distracted and almost forgot my question. So I kind of want to get back on the social intelligence topic the intelligent disobedience topic. So as you're beginning to, like you had said, you will slowly phase out the cue if you've used a leash a leash guide to tell them to go left or right, and you're slowly phasing out that leash guide. So when you start to do that, do you have kind of like a rhyme or reason, or does it vary per dog as to how many times you like? So for me, I will generally, like, if we're repeating the same thing, even if it's not in the same training session, say we come to a certain intersection all the time and we always go left. So eventually I will just stop saying it there one time, but then say left the next time, and then not, kind of randomize it so that he's getting the cue sometimes and not getting the cue sometimes. So I guess my main question is, when you're working through that process, do you have like a way that either you yourself or maybe you and a group of others kind of sit back and say, all right, this is what we want to look at. This is our end goal, and this is where we are now. So how do we backtrack it? So kind of the planning phase, I guess, of backtracking that to get the dog where you want them to be. And of course, all dogs need smaller baby steps. Some need smaller baby steps, some can move more quickly, but how do you kind of like line out your plan when you're doing that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. We do have plans in place for all the behaviors that we do. So we have it's written out, by the last stage, the dog should be doing this. And then we have all the stages up to that stage as well. And what you've alluded to there is we can't really have a set in stone. By week 3, you should be doing, 10 collar cues rather than 20 or anything like that, because every dog is different. But what we would try and do is make sure, so we would vary the level of support we were given. So if we were on a route that was known to the dog, that would practice a lot with the dog, we would think, right, on this route, I don't need as much support as I might on a new route. So we might think, right, I'm not going to use the collar cues, I'm going to rely on the dog to do it, unless there's something going on, which means that we have to give the dog more support. Then if we went to a more complex route that the dog maybe didn't know so well or hadn't done before, we might have to bring back in that level of support to make sure the dog was successful. But on repeat routes, we would lessen that support based on what we're observing with the dog. It is really important that we do fade out those cues, though, because a guide dog owner is not going to be able to give those physical prompts for moving left and right. So we do have a very clear goal in our head of what the dog should be doing down the straight. When there's obstacles in the way, it should be able to navigate all the obstacles and get to the next objective without having to have the handler cue any of those movements. And then, so, it's one bit of kibble will be at that curb after doing all of these behaviors all the way down there. But we do also use obstacle courses as well. Penny, so on site will have a much more controlled environment that we can set up to the level that the dogs need. And when we start that up, it's very easy. It's very like left, right, left, right, left, right. And it's very obvious. And that's how it will start. So we can get those movements, and then we can deliver the vocal praise, or we can install our platforms around the obstacle course so we can reinforce at those points as well. But it's a much more controlled way of doing it. And then as they get better at just the lefts and rights, we might make the obstacles harder and harder. And then we can transfer that out into the real environment as well. So it's a really staged approach on how we would lower that support. But I guess in a controlled environment, like on the obstacle course, you know how well your dog performed on the previous go, and everything else is exactly the same. So it's a much easier way, I guess, to know how much you're withdrawing the support as you're going along.
Then when you go back out into, say, a real world or real life situation, do you add the cues back in and slowly fade them out again at that point?
Yeah. And the point we get to, so that when they get onto class with a guide dog owner, there won't be any more collar cues at that point, because, well, we haven't got hold of the lead at all, so we can't really do it. And the guide dog owner won't be able to cue for those. So that, yeah, that's what we're aiming for. So by the time we get to the point where we're going on to class, we want to have faded out those collar cues completely. But up until those points, we're probably dropping in, dropping out, and assessing the dog at all points. Some dogs are going to be better than other dogs at it. That's always the case. And there's, you know, some dogs are always going to be distracted by another dog coming in, and they are going to probably miss some right shoulder work things there. But there'll be, and again, this goes back to the match, where the match can be so important, because you might have somebody with some residual vision that might be able to support the dog sometimes a bit more, or you might just have a handler that's really good, can really read when the dog might be distracted, and just give more support that way, because they've got that experience. So yeah, it comes down to the match game. Once you've
I think my dog is always going to be distracted by other dogs.
Yeah.
And I mean, he is only 2.5. He could still move past it. And he's not distracted to the point that it creates a problem. You know, he's not reacting at the other dog. He's basically just letting me know, hey, Mom, there's a dog, and I want to be able to observe it from a safe distance. You know, that's what he wants to do. So getting him to move away can be challenging because he wants to watch. But, you know, getting them to that point was very difficult, because dogs are always so exciting to him. And that's going to be his biggest challenge, I think, for the rest of his life, is when he sees another dog. Elliot has a question. Let's turn it over to Elliot.
I was wondering, because I've noticed, at least with my dog, one of his huge strengths is pattern recognition, is he picks up on patterns incredibly fast. And so it's enabled me with him to phase out verbal cues and even hand cues way, way, way faster than I ever have with any other dog, because he just learns patterns. Like, oh, we're here, we're going to do this. And he understands it. And so I'm wondering if there are games to teach and improve pattern recognition in dogs at an early age to make them kind of more preconditioned to recognizing those patterns. That would then be useful, because that's like his strength, and that's just part of his breed, I think, is most primitive type breeds do really well with patterns, because survival, you want to pick up on a pattern faster. So I just wonder if that's something that could be kind of worked with for that purpose.
So interesting you should say that, Elliot, because my pet dog is a street dog, and she picks up on patterns really quickly as well. And it's really useful, like you say, because you can enter a new training environment. You might have a similar sort of sequence, and she's there straight away, and she started doing it. I think, yeah, like you were saying, it is slightly, some breeds are better at it than others. I'm sure some individual dogs are better than others. It made me think of Ken Ramirez's item discrimination game, whether that might really help. And that's something we tried with our pet dog Tui as well. Have you seen that? Have you seen him doing that?
I have, and he's really good with not just item discrimination, but because that's the thing, is he learned in quote unquote intelligent disobedience really fast when he learned that this is my job, this is what gets rewarded the most, is when I do my task behaviors. And so same with his other one is if he needs to go toilet and he's inside, doesn't matter what we're doing, he will break it and run to the door unless it's for a task, because he's like, we heavily conditioned him of, no, we need to get you outside, because he did not come potty trained to us as an adult dog. So because we were heavily reinforced that, that's what he does. And yeah, he's really good with routines, which is great for me because he keeps me in my routine because it's all a big pattern for him. And so he makes sure that my autistic self remembers to take breaks and eat and do things at a specific time because he just does that.
Yeah, no, our dog as well. She used to the label separation anxiety. She used to display lots of those behaviours, and for her, that routine and having the pattern has massively helped. So we have a very strong pattern for her now. Whenever we're going out, and we can leave her for a long period of time. One other form of training I thought that could really help with that kind of thing as well could be do as I do training. Have you seen that, where you teach the dog to copy kind of what you're doing? And that sounds similar to kind of teaching, this is a pattern, this is the sequence that we go to, and that form of training could be really good to hone that.
That would probably be good, especially for dogs like the retriever breeds that are really prone already to paying closer attention to humans than, a Sholoit's Quintley is. Like, I think that would be a great way to teach pattern recognition with the handler. With him, he's definitely was more environmentally cued because, his focus is naturally more on the environment than the handler.
Yeah, I think there's probably some pitfalls sometimes with such strong pattern recognition as well, isn't there? I can't think of any examples of. Yeah, I can't think of examples offhand.
Well, when he first was learning how to be trained, he had to learn that you couldn't just sitting itself was not the cue to get a treat, as he was heavily, anytime I sit my butt down, I will get it. So he would literally sit, raise his butt up an inch, sit back down, raise his butt up an inch, sit back down in like 20 times succession, thinking he would get 20 treats. And had to learn, no, you really had to follow my cues. And that did take a lot of shaking up patterns as we went. Is I would have to learn where his brain was going and do the opposite so that then he'd have to turn around and do it. And that's actually why, and then I wound up having to phase some cues out faster to some of the verbal cues. So he had to watch my body and then he just picked those up really fast. And then that was it.
Yeah. I do think it's really helpful in some of those situations because we have some reactivity with our dog as well, but she knows in certain situations where, well, she knows she's completely safe because this is routine, squeezy cheese on us, all that kind of thing. That normally if there's other dogs around in a particular way or this platform, she's like, right, I know what's going on here. So we don't get any of that, but she learns that really quickly, all those. Oh, so I'm in this situation now, this is a training situation. I know exactly what's going to happen, exactly what we're doing and all those kinds of things. So has lots of pluses being able to do that. I think no dogs taught me more than the rescue dogs. Well, no dogs have taught me more than the rescue dogs I've had. And Penny, you were saying about some of the behaviours there, and I think Cindy was referring to some of the dogs teaching maybe people later on. And I definitely think that my rescue dogs, with all the issues I've had, have taught me so much dog training.
Oh yeah, and Zappo being a mature Sholo when I got him, with almost no training, he's taught me tremendously, especially because, yep, he just gave a big sigh for that one. He's some ways very similar to a permanent adolescence in the way he approaches things, but in other ways he's so surprisingly whip smart and mature and easy to train that it makes for an interesting experience of really learning extra doggy dog minds, because I feel like the primitive type breeds are not that they're more dog than other dog, but hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say, is there's more of that essence of dog instinct rather than what humans have tried to breed towards cooperative working with.
Yeah, like I said, they definitely teach you a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether my Great Pyrenees or my Poodle has taught me more. They're both thinking stop demanding. They're both thinking in a very different way. Because the Pyrenees is so independent.
And I think, in recent years as well, there's been a big push, hasn't there, not to label dogs, and quite rightly so. It's like, one golden retriever can be very different to another golden retriever. And I understand why we've moved away from that. But we also need to be aware that we've bred these dogs for certain behaviors a lot of time as well. So some of those behaviors are more prevalent in the certain breed that we've got because, well, we've bred it that way. And the same with the street dogs as well. Lots of the behaviors there are there because they've had to be there. So although we don't want to label dogs just because they're a certain breed, we don't want to chuck away all of our thinking about what that breed might be like, because it can really help us work with particular dogs as well.
So quick, typically, as normal with our chats, we have gotten off topic and gone past time. So I do want to just say a thank you to Tony and everyone else who has joined us today. This has been a fun chat.